Have you ever felt invisible? Like you're just part of the background, a ghost serving champagne and smiles while the real world celebrates without you. That was Serafina Rossi's life. A waitress, haunted by a past she buried under a starched apron and tired feet. But one night, in a ballroom, dripping with diamonds and disdain, she was seen. A ruthless billionaire, a man who believed his money could buy the world, made her a target. He dared the invisible girl to dance, expecting her to stumble. He never imagined that in daring the waitress, he was awakening a queen. The Ethelred Grand Ballroom was a galaxy unto itself. Constellations of crystal chandeliers dripped light onto a swirling universe of silk satin and old money. The air, thick with the scent of imported lilies and expensive perfume, hummed with the low thrum of a string quartet and the even lower thrum of billion-dollar deals being brokered over canapes. For Serafina Rossi, the galaxy was viewed from the outside and through the narrow lens of her duty. Her universe was the weight of a silver tray, the precise angle at which to pour Dom Perignon without a single wasted drop, and the practiced art of becoming human wallpaper. Tonight her wallpaper was fading. Her feet, encased in the restaurant-mandated black flats, were screaming a protest that had started as a whisper 3 hours ago. A deep, familiar ache radiated from her left ankle, a ghost of an old injury that chose the most inopportune times to remind her of a life she'd once dreamed of. A life of spotlights, not fluorescent kitchen lights. A life of applause, not the clatter of cutlery. Rossi Table 9 needs another bottle of the 82 Lafite. And smile, for God's sake. You look like you're carrying the sins of the world on that tray. Not shrimp. Puffs, hissed Mr. Abernathy, the event manager, his pencil-thin moustache twitching with irritation. Serafina forced the corners of her mouth upward. It felt like lifting weights. Yes, Mr. Abernathy. Table 9 was the epicenter of the ballroom's gravitational pull. At its head sat Damian Blackwood, a man whose face was plastered on the cover of every financial magazine in the country. He was a titan of tech, a shark in a bespoke suit with a reputation for corporate takeovers as hostile as his personality. His eyes, the color of cold steel, missed nothing and valued little. He didn't just command a room. He owned the very air in it. Surrounding him were his sycophants, laughing too loudly at his clipped, unsmiling jokes. And on his arm was a woman Serafina knew all too well, a ghost from that other life. Victoria Vance. Her posture was perfect, her smile a predatory glitter. She was a celebrated ballerina, now the darling of the New York arts scene. The woman who had been her partner, her best friend, her betrayer. Serafina's breath hitched. She focused on the intricate pattern of the Persian rug, counting the knots, willing her heart rate to slow. She hadn't seen Victoria in person since the incident. 5 years ago. A lifetime ago. The world had called it a tragic accident during the international dance finals. Serafina knew it was a deliberate misstep, a calculated betrayal on the world's biggest stage that had sent her tumbling down, shattering her ankle and her spirit in one sickening crunch. Victoria had feigned horror, shed crocodile tears, and then pirouetted her way into the solo career that should have been theirs together. Serafina retrieved the wine, her hand steady, despite the tremor in her soul. As she approached Table 9, Damian Blackwood was holding court, his voice a low, arrogant drawl that cut through the surrounding chatter. The problem with 99% of the world, he was saying, gesturing dismissively with a hand that wore a watch worth more than her apartment building, is a lack of ambition. They're content to serve, to exist in the background. They have no fire, no drive to be someone. His cold eyes swept the room, and for a horrifying second, They landed on Serafina. It was a glance of pure dismissal, the way one might look at a chair or a coat rack. She began to pour the wine, her movements fluid and economical, a ghost in a black and white uniform. Victoria saw her then, a flicker of recognition quickly masked by a sneer of contemptuous pity. Victoria leaned over and whispered something in Damien's ear. His lips curled into a cruel smirk. Serafina finished pouring for the guest to Damien's right and moved to fill his glass. As she leaned in, a junior waiter, nervous and clumsy, jostled past her from behind. The heavy silver tray tilted. A single drop of crimson wine, a ruby of impending disaster, fell from the bottle, landing squarely on the pristine white cuff of Damien Blackwood's shirt. Silence descended upon the table. The string quartet seemed to falter. Damien stared at the red stain as if it were a mortal wound. He slowly lifted his gaze from his cuff to Serafina's face. His eyes were not angry. They were worse. They were amused in a way that made her skin crawl. "Well, well," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "It seems the wallpaper has decided to leave a mark." "I am so terribly sorry," Serafina said, her voice barely a whisper. "It was an accident." An accident, he mused, dabbing at the stain with a napkin, only making it worse. He looked at Victoria, who was watching with undisguised glee. "Victoria, my dear, you were just telling me about your humble beginnings. The discipline, the rigor. Tell me, does this one look like she has any discipline?" Victoria laughed, a sound like tiny sharp bells. "Darling, please. Look at her. She can barely handle a bottle of wine. I doubt she could walk in a straight line, let alone dance." The word hung in the air. Dance. Serafina's spine stiffened. The ghost ache in her ankle flared a phantom pain that was more memory than reality. Damien's smirk widened. He saw the flicker of defiance in her eyes, the tightening of her jaw. He thrived on moments like this, on pushing people, on proving his point, that everyone and everything had a price. He saw a challenge. He stood up, drawing the attention of the surrounding tables. The air crackled with anticipation. This was what Damien Blackwood did. He created spectacles. "I have a proposition," he announced, his voice carrying across the opulent room. He turned his full attention to Serafina, who felt pinned by the collective gaze of the city's elite. "The orchestra is playing a waltz, a simple dance. Even a child could manage it." He pulled out a thick black wallet. From it, he extracted a stack of bills held together by a gold clip. He methodically counted out 10 $1,000 bills. He fanned them out and placed them on the table. $10,000, he said, his voice laced with mocking condescension. "I dare you. Dance one waltz with me. Right here, right now. If you can complete it without tripping over your own feet or disgracing the music, the money is yours." It wasn't an offer. It was an execution. He was daring her to humiliate herself for his amusement and the entertainment of his guests. He was reducing her to a party trick, a trained animal performing for a scrap. He expected her to blush, to stammer, to refuse and scurry away in shame, or even better, to accept and make a complete fool of herself. Serafina looked at the money. It was more than she made in 3 months. It could fix the leaky roof in her father's small house. It could buy her some breathing room, a moment of peace in a life of constant struggle. Then she looked at Victoria, whose face was a mask of smug certainty, whispering to Damien, "She won't do it. She has 2 left feet." And finally she looked into Damien Blackwood's cold, arrogant eyes. He saw a waitress, a nobody, a clumsy, invisible girl who spilled wine. He didn't see the years of 8-hour rehearsals. He didn't see the bloody, pointy shoes. He didn't see the girl who had once been on the verge of conquering the world, one perfect grand jeté at a time. A slow fire began to burn in her chest, incinerating the years of shame and fear. He wanted a show. He wanted to see if the waitress could dance. Fine. She would give him a show he would never forget. Fine. Serafina said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the expectant silence. She untied the strings of her stained apron and let it fall to the floor. I accept your dare. The moment the simple two-syllable phrase "I accept" left Serafina's lips, the atmosphere in the ether-red grand ballroom shifted. The low hum of conversation didn't just quiet. It was sliced away, leaving a vacuum of stunned silence. 100 pairs of eyes accustomed to watching stock tickers and auction prices were now fixed on the waitress in her simple black dress and worn-out flats. They had expected a flushed refusal or a tearful retreat. They were not prepared for the calm, collected defiance that now radiated from her. Damien Blackwood himself was momentarily taken aback. A flicker of surprise crossed his features before being replaced by an even more pronounced arrogance. This was better than he had hoped. The girl had spirit. It would make her inevitable failure all the more entertaining. He gestured grandly toward the marble dance floor in the center of the room. "The stage is yours," he said, his tone dripping with theatrical magnanimity. As Serafina walked from the table, a path seemed to clear for her. Guests leaned back in their chairs, their expressions a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. She could feel their judgment like a physical weight. Who does she think she is? This will be a train wreck. She ignored them. She ignored the frantic, apoplectic face of Mr. Abernathy, who looked as if he might faint. Her focus narrowed, sharpened. All that existed was the polished marble floor, a space she hadn't commanded in 5 long years. She reached the edge of the floor and paused, closing her eyes for a single, fleeting second. In the darkness, she wasn't a waitress. She was Serafina Rossi, the prodigy, the dancer who spoke a language more eloquent than words. She took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of lilies and wealth, and exhaled the dust of her recent past, the grease-filled air of the diner, the sting of disinfectant, the crushing anonymity. When she opened her eyes, the timid, apologetic waitress was gone. In her place stood someone else, a woman with a spine of steel and fire in her veins. Damien strode onto the floor to meet her, a predator closing in on his prey. He moved with an easy, athletic grace that came from expensive trainers and private tennis courts, not a dance studio. He held out his hand, expecting her to take it meekly. The rules are simple. He stated, his voice a low command, meant only for her, though everyone was straining to hear. "You follow my lead. No mistakes. Don't embarrass me more than you're already about to embarrass yourself." Serafina looked at his outstretched hand, but didn't take it. Instead, her gaze drifted past him, locking on to Victoria Vance, who was now standing at the edge of the dance floor, a champagne flute held tightly in her perfectly manicured hand. Her smile was gone, replaced by a tight, watchful expression. She saw the change in Serafina's posture, the confidence in her stance. For the first time that night, a sliver of unease penetrated Victoria's polished facade. She knew what Serafina was capable of, or rather what she had been capable of. Serafina turned her attention back to Damien. "A waltz, you said?" Her voice was no longer tremulous. It was musical with a clear, resonant quality, the simplest of dances. "Try to keep up," he replied curtly, his patience wearing thin. He finally took her hand, his grip firm and possessive. He placed his other hand on her waist, pulling her closer than was proper for a formal waltz. It was another power play, a physical assertion of his dominance. He expected her to flinch, to be intimidated. She did not. She met his condescending gaze with an unnervingly level one of her own. As the orchestra swelled, beginning the gentle, 1, 2, 3 rhythm of the waltz. Damien took the first step, leading her into the dance. For the first few bars of music, he controlled the movement completely. He was a competent leader, strong and decisive, clearly having been taught by expensive instructors. He moved her across the floor in wide, sweeping circles, his steps sure and predictable. Serafina followed his lead flawlessly. Her body, which had been stiff with exhaustion only moments before, seemed to remember its purpose. Her feet in their soft-soled flats made no sound on the marble. She was light-responsive, a perfect partner. The crowd watched a low murmur rippling through them. They were surprised. The waitress wasn't clumsy. She wasn't stumbling. She was graceful. Damien felt it too. He had expected to be dragging a sack of potatoes across the floor. Instead, the woman in his arms moved with an almost ethereal lightness. There was no resistance, no hesitation. She anticipated his every move, her frame perfectly aligned with his. He found himself leading more complex turns, testing her, trying to find the flaw, the break in her composure. A reverse turn, a natural weave. She mirrored him perfectly, her body a seamless extension of his lid. He was annoyed. This wasn't the public humiliation he had paid for. He was a man who always got what he wanted, and he wanted to be proven right. He wanted to see her fail. He looked over her shoulder and caught Victoria's eye. She gave him a subtle, almost imperceptible shake of her head, a warning. But Damien mistook it for a challenge. He thought she was doubting his ability to expose this waitress for the fraud she surely was. His grip on Serafina's hand tightened his lead, becoming more aggressive, less a dance, and more a contest of wills. He forced her into a faster spin, trying to throw her off balance. It was his first mistake. As he propelled her into the spin, Serafina didn't just follow. She used his own aggressive momentum, channeling it. Instead of a simple single spin, she allowed the force to carry her into a double, then a triple pirouette, her head whipping around in a perfect spot, her balance unshakable. She came out of the spin exactly on the beat, landing softly, her eyes locking back onto his. A collective gasp went through the ballroom. That was not the move of a novice. It was the technique of a professional. Damien was stunned. He faltered for half a beat, his footwork momentarily losing its rhythm. For the first time in his meticulously controlled life, he was not the one in charge. The power dynamic on the dance floor had just irrevocably shifted. Serafina saw his shock. She saw the confusion warring with his anger. And she saw her opening. The orchestra was still playing the simple, predictable waltz. But the music in her soul, the music that had been dormant for 5 years, was a raging, passionate symphony. With a subtle pressure of her hand against his, a slight shift in her weight that he was completely unprepared for, she reversed the lead. It was a move so technically brilliant and so swiftly executed that he had no choice but to follow or risk looking like a fool. Suddenly, he was the one being guided. Her simple black waitress dress swirled around her knees as she drove him backward, her steps no longer confined to the gentle gliding motion of a waltz. She began to infuse the dance with a new language, a hint of tango in the sharp staccato turn of her head, a flash of paso doble in the proud arch of her back, and the fire in her eyes. She was no longer just dancing to the music. She was embodying it, transforming the simple melody into something fierce and breathtaking. The crowd was mesmerized. They were no longer watching a billionaire toy with a waitress. They were witnessing the emergence of an artist. Victoria Vance watched from the sidelines, her face pale, the champagne flute frozen halfway to her lips. She recognized the fire, the passion, the flawless technique. This wasn't the broken girl she had left behind on the floor 5 years ago. This was Serafina Rossi. And she was back. Damien, caught in her orbit, was struggling. He was strong, but his body knew only the rigid rules he had been taught. Her body knew a freedom he couldn't comprehend. She led him through a series of intricate steps he had never seen before, her feet a blur of controlled energy. He was focused so intently on not making a mistake that he failed to see what she was truly doing. She wasn't just dancing. She was telling a story, her story. And the climax was just about to begin. The music from the string quartet was still technically a waltz. The gentle lilting rhythm continued its steady 1-2-3 count. But on the dance floor, Serafina Rossi was conducting a different orchestra entirely. She had taken the simple framework of the dance and set it ablaze. The marble floor was no longer just a surface. It was her canvas, and her movements were painting a masterpiece of defiance and resurrection. Damien Blackwood, the man who controlled boardrooms and manipulated global markets, was now utterly powerless. He was a prop in her performance. Serafina guided him with an undeniable, almost telepathic force. His feet moved where she directed, his body turned when she commanded. To the untrained eye, it might have still looked like he was leading, but the connoisseurs in the room, the patrons of the arts, the ballet aficionados, they knew. They saw the subtle tension in his shoulders, the confusion in his eyes, and they saw the raw, unbridled power emanating from the waitress. She lowered their joined hands, breaking the formal waltz frame, and in one fluid motion spun away from him to the full extension of her arm. The crowd gasped. It was a dramatic, theatrical move, straight from a competitive ballroom final. For a single breathtaking moment, she held the pose. Her back arched, her head thrown back, her free arm extended toward the ceiling, as if reaching for the memory of a spotlight. The simple black fabric of her dress, a uniform meant to make her invisible, now seemed impossibly elegant, clinging to a form sculpted by a decade of relentless training. Then she coiled back in towards him, using the tension in their arms to launch into a series of syncopated steps that shattered the waltz rhythm into 1,000 brilliant pieces. Her feet moved with a speed and precision that was hypnotic. It was a flurry of heel turns, chasses, and lightning-fast flicks, a vocabulary of movement that was both classical and fiercely modern. She was a whirlwind of controlled chaos, and Damien was the silent, stunned eye of the storm. He could feel the heat radiating from her, the percussive beat of her heart, the sheer force of her will. The condescending amusement he had felt just minutes ago had evaporated, replaced by a bewildering mix of fury, humiliation, and a strange, unwilling flicker of awe. This woman was not just dancing, she was communicating, and her message was a blistering rebuke of him, of his world, of everyone who had ever underestimated her. Serafina's eyes were no longer on Damien. They were locked on Victoria Vance. Across the crowded ballroom, a silent, vicious war was being waged. Every sharp turn of Serafina's head was an accusation. Every powerful extension of her leg was a memory of their shared dream. Every moment of perfect, unshakable balance was a testament to the strength she had found in her brokenness. She led Damien in a wide, sweeping circle around the floor, deliberately bringing him closer to where Victoria stood, paralyzed. The music was nearing its crescendo, the violins soaring to their highest, most emotional pitch. Serafina knew this was her moment. The finale. She executed a move of staggering difficulty and audacity. She released Damien's hand entirely, leaving him standing awkwardly alone in the middle of the floor. For 2 full bars of music, she danced solo. It was a sequence of pure, unadulterated passion, a spinning disengage that flowed into a series of fouette turns, each one faster and more perfect than the last. The crowd was on its feet, their applause starting to build, forgetting their dinner, their deals, their decorum. Victoria watched her knuckles white around the stem of her glass. She saw the ghost of their old choreography, the sequence they had been practicing for the finals, the very sequence that had been interrupted by her betrayal. But Serafina had changed it. She had made it stronger, more defiant. She had finished it. For the final note of the song, Serafina spun back towards the stunned Damien, but she didn't stop in a graceful formal pose. She used her momentum, sliding across the marble on the balls of her feet, a move of athletic, almost feral grace. She came to a halt less than an inch from him, her chest rising and falling with exertion. She was close enough to feel his shocked breath on her face. She didn't smile. She didn't curtsy. She simply held his gaze, her eyes burning with an intensity that stripped away his billions, his power, his arrogance, leaving him exposed and utterly defeated. In her eyes, he saw not a triumphant servant, but a queen who had just reclaimed her throne. The final note of the waltz hung in the air, vibrating in the sudden absolute silence that followed. The applause that had been building died in people's throats. They were holding their breath, witnesses to something far more profound than a simple dance. Then the silence was shattered. A single person began to clap. Not the polite rhythmic applause of the wealthy, but a loud, explosive ovation. It was an old man with a white beard sitting at a corner table, someone Serafina didn't recognize. But his eyes were shining with tears. Then another person joined, and another, and within seconds the Ethelred Grand Ballroom erupted in a thunderous standing ovation. It wasn't just for the dance, it was for the story they had all just witnessed. Damien Blackwood stood frozen, the applause crashing around him, like waves against a rock. He had been upstaged, dethroned in his own court, by his own hired help. The $10,000 lay forgotten on the table, a pathetic insult to the priceless performance she had just delivered. Serafina held his gaze for one more second, a silent final dismissal. Then she turned, not with a flourish, but with a simple, dignified grace. She walked off the dance floor, the ovation roaring in her ears. She ignored the outstretched hands, the shocked and admiring faces. She walked past Victoria, who looked as if she had seen a ghost, her face a mask of disbelief and pure terror. Serafina did not look back. She walked through the parted sea of gawking millionaires past a shell-shocked Mr. Abernathy and straight towards the service door she had entered through hours before. She pushed it open and slipped into the stark, fluorescent-lit corridor beyond, leaving the galaxy of the ballroom and its thunderous applause behind her. The door swung shut and the roar was cut off, replaced by the mundane clatter of the kitchen. She leaned against the cool metal wall, her heart hammering against her ribs, the ghost in her ankle screaming, not in pain, but in fierce, resurrected life. She had done it. She had danced again. And in doing so, she hadn't just stolen the spotlight. She had taken back her soul. The consequences of that act, she knew, were yet to come. The tempest was just beginning. The dawn that broke over New York City the next morning felt different. For most of the city it was just another Friday. For Serafina Rossi, it was the first day of a life that was no longer entirely her own. She had woken up before her alarm, the phantom sensation of the marble floor still under her feet, the echo of the applause still ringing in her ears. The adrenaline had long since faded, replaced by a gnawing anxiety. What had she done? She had walked out of the Ethelred last night without a word, grabbing her worn coat and bag from the staff room and melting into the city streets, ignoring the frantic calls of Mr. Abernathy to her phone. She knew she was fired. That was a given. What worried her more was the look in Damien Blackwood's eyes. It wasn't just the humiliation of a rich man. It was the cold fury of a predator whose prey had not only escaped, but had turned and bitten back. Hard. Men like him didn't just forget. They retaliated. Her small apartment in Queens felt like a bunker. She made coffee, her hands trembling slightly. Her roommate, Chloe, a pragmatic nursing student, was already awake, staring at her phone with wide, disbelieving eyes. "Sarah," Chloe said, her voice hushed with awe. "You need to see this." She turned her phone around. There it was. A video clearly filmed on a guest's phone, shaky and a little grainy but unmistakable. The title read, "Mystery Waitress Humiliates Billionaire Damian Blackwood on Dance Floor." Serafina's heart sank. The video was everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok news sites. It had 1 million views, then 2 million. It was a viral wildfire. The comment section was an explosion of speculation and adoration. They were calling her the waltzing waitress, a Cinderella in a black dress. They lauded her for putting the notoriously arrogant Blackwood in his place. They marveled at her talent, dissecting every move, every turn. Hashtags like Blackwood Beaten and Sarah the Star were trending. She was no longer anonymous. In the space of 8 hours, she had become a public spectacle, her face and her story, or at least the sensationalized version of it, consumed by millions. The privacy she had so carefully cultivated for 5 years had been obliterated. This is bad, Chloe," Serafina whispered, sinking onto a kitchen chair. "Bad Sarah, this is incredible. You're a hero. People are trying to find out who you are. A dozen news outlets are trying to identify you. This could be your big break." "It's not a break, it's a catastrophe." She countered, her voice tight with panic. "A man like Damian Blackwood doesn't get publicly humiliated and then send a thank you card. And Victoria, she knows who I am. She's not going to let this go." Her fears about Blackwood were confirmed sooner than she expected. There was a sharp knock at the door. Not the friendly rap of a neighbor, but a hard, official sound. Chloe looked at Serafina, her excitement turning to concern. Serafina peeked through the peephole. 2 men in dark, impeccably tailored suits stood in the hallway. They did not look like talent scouts. She opened the door a crack. "Serafina Rossi," the taller man asked. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "Who's asking?" He didn't answer. Instead, he handed her a thick, cream-colored envelope, embossed with a single stylized B. "Mr. Blackwood requests a meeting. He is prepared to be very generous. A car will be waiting for you downstairs at noon." It wasn't a request. It was a summons. Before she could respond, they turned and walked away. She closed the door, her back pressing against it. Generous. The word sounded like a threat. He wasn't going to sue her or have her blacklisted from every service job in the city. His ego was more complex than that. He couldn't stand being beaten, so his instinct was to buy the thing that beat him. He wanted to own her talent, to control the narrative, to turn his public humiliation into a story of his own brilliant discovery. He wanted to put her in a gilded cage. Her phone rang, startling her. An unknown number with a European country code. She almost ignored it, assuming it was a reporter who had somehow gotten her number. But something compelled her to answer. "Hello?" she said, tentatively. There was a pause, then a voice, gravelly with age, and thick with a Russian accent, a voice that instantly transported her back to a brightly lit dance studio filled with the scent of rosin and sweat. A voice she thought she would never hear again. "Serafina, my little firebird, is that truly you?" Tears sprang to her eyes. Her breath caught in her throat. "Mikhail." It was Mikhail Petrov, the legendary choreographer, her mentor, her teacher, the man who had believed in her more than anyone. He had been a father figure to her before the incident. After her fall, Crushed by shame and the belief that she had failed him, she had cut off all contact, disappearing without a word. "I saw a video," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "A ghost dancing in a ballroom. But I know your lines. I know your fire. It could only be you. Why, Serafina? Why did you disappear? I never for a moment believed the official story. Mikhail, I couldn't." She stammered the words, catching in her throat. "I was broken. Broken things can be mended," he said gently. "Or they can be reforged into something stronger. I am in New York for 2 weeks preparing for a new showcase, a very important one. I want to see you. We have much to talk about, the past, and more importantly, the future. Your future." Serafina's world, which had been spinning out of control all morning, suddenly found a new axis. 2 paths were being laid out before her with terrifying clarity. One was represented by the heavy embossed envelope on her table, a path of wealth control and compromise offered by Damian Blackwood. The other was a ghost's call from her past, a voice offering not money, but something far more valuable, a chance at redemption. A chance to reclaim the life she had lost. She looked at the envelope, then at her own reflection in the dark screen of her phone. The waitress was gone. The dancer was back. And she had a choice to make. The car would be downstairs at noon, but her meeting with Mikhail, she decided in that instant, would be first. Damian Blackwood could wait. He had dared her to dance. He had no idea he had also dared her to dream again. The coffee shop in Greenwich Village was a world away from the Ethelred ballroom. The air smelled of roasted beans and old books, not lilies and money. It was anonymous, quiet and real. Serafina sat at a small table in the back, clutching a warm mug, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She had been a full 10 minutes early. Then he walked in. Mikhail Petrov looked older, his wild mane of white hair, thinner, the lines around his eyes deeper, but he moved with the same deliberate grace of a man whose entire life was dedicated to the art of motion. He saw her instantly, and his stern Slavic face broke into a wide, genuine smile. "My Firebird," he said, his voice a low rumble as he enveloped her in a hug that smelled of old leather and mint. It felt like coming home. They sat for an hour, the conversation flowing as if 5 years had been only 5 minutes. She told him everything, the pressure before the finals, the subtle ways Victoria had begun to undermine her confidence, the accident itself. She spoke of the sickening snap in her ankle, but more than that, the snap in her soul, and the overwhelming shame that had driven her into hiding. Mikhail listened patiently, his dark eyes never leaving her face. When she finished, he reached across the table and placed his large, weathered hand over hers. "I knew it," he said, his voice laced with a deep, ancient anger. "In my bones I knew Victoria was lying. Your technique was flawless. You would never have made such a novice mistake." She shifted her weight at the apex of the lift. A centimeter was all it took. Deliberate. Malicious. Hearing him confirm her deepest, darkest suspicion was a strange kind of vindication. "I had no proof," Serafina whispered. "It was my word against hers. She was the star. I was just the girl who fell. Proof is for courts of law. Truth is for the stage," Mikhail declared. "And the truth of your talent was on full display for the world to see last night. It was reckless, yes, but it was magnificent." He leaned back, a serious expression settling on his face. "I am not here just to reminisce, Serafina. I am here to work. I am choreographing a new showcase, Phoenix. It's about rebirth, about rising from the ashes. I have the funding, the theatre, but I do not have my star. I have been searching for my Phoenix. And last night I found her. He was offering her the lead role. Not just a place in the corps de ballet, but the central part. It was a chance to not only dance again, but to tell her own story, to exorcise her demons in the one place she felt truly hold the stage. I haven't trained in 5 years, Mikhail, she said, the doubt creeping back in. My body. The body does not forget, he interrupted firmly. The soul remembers. We will work. Hard. You will be stronger than you ever were. This is your destiny, Serafina, if you are brave enough to claim it. Brave enough to claim it. The words echoed in her mind as she left the coffee shop, his offer, a blazing star of hope in her turbulent thoughts. But she had another meeting to attend, one that represented a very different kind of future. The Blacktown car was waiting exactly where the man had said it would be. The ride to Blackwood Tower was a silent, surreal journey through the heart of the city's financial district. The tower itself was an arrogant shard of glass and steel that pierced the skyline, a monument to Damien Blackwood's ego. She was escorted to the top floor to an office that was larger than her entire apartment. 3 walls were floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a god's-eye view of the city below. The 4th wall was dominated by a single abstract painting of chaotic, angry slashes of black and red. It was a room that radiated power and control. Damien Blackwood was not sitting behind his massive desk. He stood by the window looking out at his kingdom. He turned as she entered his face, an unreadable mask. There was no apology in his eyes, no hint of remorse. There was only that cold, calculating intensity. Miss Rossi, he said, his voice smooth and detached. Thank you for coming. Please have a seat. She remained standing. I'm not here for pleasantries, Mr. Blackwood. What do you want? A small, humorless smile touched his lips. Direct, I appreciate that. What I want, Miss Rossi, is you. He gestured to a sleek leather portfolio on the desk. Last night was unexpected. You possess a rare, marketable talent. The public is captivated by your story. The underdog waitress who bested the billionaire. It's a powerful narrative. A narrative you created with your cruelty, she shot back. Semantics. He waved a dismissive hand. The result is the same. You are now a commodity. And I am the best in the world at maximizing the value of a commodity. That portfolio contains a contract, an exclusive 5-year contract with a new entertainment division I am creating, centered entirely around you. He began to pace his voice, filled with a chilling enthusiasm. We will craft your image. National interviews, television specials, endorsement deals with luxury brands. A world tour. The waltzing waitress, we'll call it. We'll lean into the Cinderella story. It's perfect. He was talking about her life as if it were a business plan, a series of assets to be leveraged. He wasn't interested in her art. He was interested in her brand. And the dancing, she asked, her voice laced with ice. Of course, the dancing, he said, as if it were an afterthought. You'll perform what our marketing teams deem most appealing, popular, accessible, nothing too esoteric. The goal is mass appeal, not critical acclaim. He was offering to make her famous. He was offering to make her a star. But it would be a star of his creation, shining with a light he controlled. He was offering her the most beautiful, luxurious cage she could ever imagine. And in return for signing my life away, she asked. He stopped pacing and looked directly at her. I am prepared to offer you a signing bonus of $5 million, with a salary and revenue share that would likely see you earn 10 times that over the course of the contract. The number hung in the air, vast and dizzying. $5 million. It was a sum that could change not just her life, but the lives of her family for generations. It could buy security, comfort, freedom from worry. It was everything she had ever dreamed of, and everything she now feared. She thought of Mikhail's offer. It came with no money, only the promise of hard work, sore muscles, and the uncertain hope of artistic fulfillment. It was a path of struggle, but it was her path. While she stood there, her mind reeling, Damien's personal assistant, a nervous young woman, entered the office and whispered something in his ear. His expression darkened. "It seems we have a competitor for your affections," he said, his voice turning sharp. A story just broke on an arts and culture blog. Victoria Vance accuses mystery dancer of unstable and dangerous behavior. It quotes anonymous sources from your past, claiming your accident was the result of a mental breakdown, that you were professionally reckless. Vance herself gives a tearful quote, saying she's worried for your well-being. Serafina felt the blood drain from her face. Victoria had fired the first shot, a vicious, calculated smear campaign designed to discredit her before she could even get started. Damien saw her shock, and he pounced, sensing an opportunity. "This is what happens when you're out there alone, Miss Rossi. The world is full of sharks. But I can make this go away. Sign with me. My PR team can kill this story in an hour. We'll paint Vance as a jealous rival. We will protect you. I will protect you. All you have to do is sign." He was offering her a shield. He would be her champion, her protector, and her owner. The choice was suddenly starker than ever. Safety in a cage of gold, or freedom in a world of sharks. The words of the blog post echoed in Serafina's mind, a venomous whisper designed to poison her second chance before it had even begun. Unstable, dangerous, mental breakdown. They were the classic tools of character assassination, cruel and brutally effective. Victoria wasn't just trying to protect her own reputation. She was trying to erase Serafina's future. The article painted a picture of a talented but volatile artist who was a liability, someone no sane producer or choreographer would ever risk working with. Damien Blackwood watched her, his expression a mask of calculated sympathy. A difficult situation, he said, his voice smooth as silk. But not an insurmountable one. Not for me. My media connections are extensive. We can release a counter-narrative. We can dig into Ms. Vance's past. Everyone has skeletons, Ms. Rossi. It's simply a matter of who has the more expensive key to open the closet. He was offering to fight fire with fire, to drag the battle into the mud where he was most comfortable. He would destroy Victoria's reputation to salvage the brand he wanted to build around Serafina. It was a tempting offer. The desire for revenge was a hot, bitter taste in her mouth. She imagined Victoria's perfect world crumbling, the adoring public turning on her. But then she thought of Mikhail. He had spoken of truth on the stage of art of rebirth. He hadn't spoken of smear campaigns or digging up dirt. He had offered her a path of integrity. Damien was offering a path of destruction, a scorched earth policy that would inevitably burn her as well. To accept his help would be to become like him, to believe that power and manipulation were the only currencies that mattered. Serafina took a deep breath, the chaos in her mind settling into a cold, hard clarity. She looked at Damien, at his impossibly expensive suit, his perfect view, his world built on acquisitions and control. She saw the gilded cage he was offering her with its soft velvet lining and its unbreakable steel bars. "No," she said. The single word fell into the cavernous office with the weight of a dropped stone. Damien's eyebrows raised slightly. He was not a man accustomed to hearing that word. "I don't think you understand the offer, Ms. Rossi. $5 million, a team of the best publicists, managers, and lawyers in the world at your disposal." "Oh, I understand it perfectly," she replied, her voice steady and strong. You're not offering to protect me. You're offering to own me. You want to package my story, sanitize my art, and sell it. You want to turn my life into one of your corporate assets. My answer is no. A flicker of genuine anger finally broke through his composed exterior. His eyes narrowed. You're being naive. You think you can fight them on your own. Victoria Vance is the darling of the ballet world. You're a waitress with a viral video. In a week you'll be forgotten, and she'll have successfully painted you as a lunatic. Your mentor Petrov will drop you so fast, your head will spin. His backers won't touch a damaged product. I am not a product, Mr. Blackwood, she said, stepping away from the desk towards the door. And my talent is not a commodity for you to trade. You dared me to dance for $10,000 because you thought I was worthless. Now you want to buy me for millions because you think you can put a price on my soul. You were wrong on both counts. She reached the door and turned back to face him. He stood silhouetted against the vast window, a king in his glass castle, looking at her with a mixture of fury and disbelief. Thank you for the offer, she said, with a finality that left no room for negotiation. But I'm not for sale. She walked out, leaving him alone in the silent, cavernous office. The fury on his face slowly morphed into something else, something she would have found even more disturbing had she seen it, a grudging, almost imperceptible sliver of respect, quickly consumed by the burning humiliation of being rejected. Damien Blackwood had been told no, and he would not forget it. Serafina felt a surge of terrifying, exhilarating freedom as the elevator descended. She had just walked away from generational wealth and a powerful, dangerous ally. She had chosen the harder path, the one fraught with uncertainty and attacked by enemies. Her phone buzzed. It was Mikhail. I saw the article, he said, his voice grim. Do not let them get into your head, Serafina. Lies are loud, but truth is resonant. Be at the studio tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock sharp. Our work begins. He hadn't wavered. He hadn't doubted her. In a world of vipers and opportunists, his loyalty was a shield. Damien had been wrong. The days that followed were a blur of grueling, painful, beautiful work. The dance studio became her sanctuary and her crucible. Her body screamed in protest as she forced it to remember the discipline it had forgotten. Muscles ached, joints complained, and the ghost of her old injury throbbed with a dull, constant rhythm. But with every stretch, every plie, every session at the bar, she felt herself coming back to life. Mikhail was a relentless taskmaster. He pushed her past the point of exhaustion, breaking down her movements and rebuilding them stronger and more refined than before. He was stripping away the waitress, the victim, the ghost, and leaving only the dancer. Meanwhile, Victoria's smear campaign continued. More articles appeared quoting anonymous former colleagues who spoke of her emotional instability and difficult temperament. Talk show hosts made snide jokes. The tide of public opinion, once so firmly in her favor, began to waver. She was no longer just the Cinderella waitress. She was becoming a controversial figure. The producers funding Mikhail's show were getting nervous. He confessed to her one evening that they had called him, suggesting he recast the lead role with a less complicated star. Mikhail had told them in no uncertain terms that if Serafina went, he went too. He was betting his own legendary reputation on her. The weight of that trust was immense. One evening, after a particularly brutal rehearsal, she sat on the floor, sweat-soaked, and shaking tears of frustration welling in her eyes. A complex lift she had once performed effortlessly was now eluding her. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her resolve. Maybe Victoria was right. Maybe Damien was right. Maybe she was broken. Mikhail sat on the floor beside her, not speaking, simply handing her a water bottle. "I can't do it." She whispered the words, tasting like failure. "Yes, you can," he said quietly. "The body is fighting, but the spirit is willing. The papers, the lies, they are trying to break your spirit because they know they cannot break your talent. The dance you will perform on opening night, it will be your answer. It will be the only answer that matters. You will not tell them your story, Serafina. You will make them feel it." He was right. Her response couldn't be a press release or a counter-accusation. Her response had to be her art. Pure, undeniable, and true. She got back up her jaw set with a new determination. She would not just perform this dance. She would become it. She would rise from the ashes, and she would show them all what fire truly looked like. Opening night at the Metcalfe Theatre was a storm of flashing cameras and tense anticipation. The city's elite had gathered, drawn by the controversy. In the front row, Victoria Vance waited smugly for a spectacular failure. A few rows behind Damien Blackwood sat in the shadows, a silent observer of the asset he had failed to acquire. Backstage, Serafina felt a calm focus. Mikhail Petrov gripped her shoulders. "Go and dance your truth," he urged. The curtain rose on a bare stage. Serafina's dance began as a portrait of brokenness, her movements conveying the agonizing fall that had shattered her dream. But as the music swelled, her dance transformed into a fiery battle for resurrection. She wasn't just performing steps. She was reliving her story, channeling years of pain and obscurity into breathtaking strength and defiance. The audience was utterly captivated, leaning forward as one. At the performance's crescendo, a grainy video clip appeared on the screen behind her. It was backstage footage from the finals 5 years ago, and it clearly showed Victoria's subtle, deliberate shrug, the malicious act of sabotage that caused the fall. A collective gasp swept the theatre. The truth, undeniable and public, had been revealed. Victoria's face went white as hundreds of eyes turned on her, her world crumbling in an instant. On stage, Serafina ignored the revelation, her dance the only answer that mattered. She finished with the very leap that had been stolen from her, a breathtaking flight of freedom. For a moment, there was stunned silence. Then the theatre exploded. The applause was a tidal wave of vindication. From the shadows, Damien stood and applauded, something he knew he could never own, then quietly departed. But Serafina, bathed in the warm spotlight she had earned, felt only the roar of the crowd and the profound peace of victory. She was no longer a waitress or a victim. She was the phoenix, finally gloriously free. That night, Serafina Rossi didn't just dance. She spoke a universal language of resilience that echoed far beyond the walls of the theatre. Her story reminds us that our past does not have to be our prison, and that true value isn't measured in dollars, but in the courage it takes to reclaim your own narrative. We all face our own Damien Blackwoods, and our own Victoria Vances, the forces that try to diminish us, define us, or buy us. Serafina's triumph wasn't just in her flawless technique, it was in her choice. The choice to reject the easy path for the true one, to answer betrayal with beauty, and to find strength not in revenge, but in the relentless pursuit of her own passion. Her story is a powerful testament to the idea that sometimes the most powerful spotlight is the one you create for yourself. If Serafina's story moved, you please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next story of incredible resilience.